Hey, Professor Wells here. So we are finally arriving to the part of North America we are most familiar with, and that is continental United States. But we're backing up some 2,000 years because we are focusing on the indigenous peoples of the United States. And it's there we're going to talk about the earliest cultural era called the Hopewell Cultural Era. The region we'll focus on is what we now call Mississippi, Illinois, Ohio, and these are considered the woodlands territories of the earliest known indigenous peoples, and also an artery for trade and travel. So we're going to see a lot of variety of materials, as well as a practice of mound building. And I'll clue you in a little bit more on that and what it was for as we move forward in our mini video lecture. So let's get to that PowerPoint. All right, some key concepts for you, but first let me talk about what you're looking at in terms of the maps on the right. The era that we're talking about in this mini lecture is called the Hopewell Cultural Era, dating from 100 BCE to 500 CE. In a subsequent lesson, we will examine the Mississippian cultural era, dates from 800 to 1600. So, key concepts that you find associated with this Hopewell era include ceremonies and rituals surrounding elaborate burial mounds that brought people from different regions together, leading to the exchange of material resources and ideas. Also, they valued cycles of renewal. That was a part of their cultural experience with ceremonial burning of remains, and I mean human remains, and the layering of additional earth and subsequent remains into mounds. Later, they'd construct temples and palaces on elevated mounds. So cycles of renewal are an important cultural value in early indigenous peoples of the woodlands. Also, you find familiar products such as tobacco traveling up from Peru and Mesoamerica, and the smoking of pipes becomes a large part of their ritualistic culture as well. So what you find here is many settlements along those iconic American rivers, and that located in the Northeast and Midwest U.S. as well. And it's with those rivers, you find evidence of trade as peoples traveled to and fro to connect with one another. And often that's around sacred ceremonies and elaborate burial practices. One such site in Ohio that is now a designated park is known as the Hopewell Ceremonial Earthwork Site. And this image on the left shows various locations that are from this early indigenous era. But at first glance, you can see how people who aren't from that time period would just see these rolling gentle slopes as part of the natural occurring hills of the region. They wouldn't even think that they were human-made. So over 6 centuries, the Ohio Hopewell built hundreds of ceremonial structures called great houses or charnel houses. This is where the dead were laid out, entombed, and often cremated. The houses themselves were constructed of wood, of logs, but once all the rituals and ceremonies were over, they were burned down, and then huge mounds of earth were piled on top. So what you find are these gradual sloping mounds. This is the location of these cycles of renewal, of death occurring, these charnel houses being erected, then burned down, and then mounds of earth piled on top, sometimes on repeat, with the larger examples we'll see later in this course. What you also find as markers for these mounds are earthworks. So these are essentially using earthen materials to sculpt enclosures or embankments that form shapes that you see at the park image on the left. These could be circular, octagonal, square, and even long avenues or processional corridors have been created. And all of these have been found over thousands of acres. So it was a well-established, widespread practice. And it's in these earthwork arenas that people gathered regularly for rituals, feasts, trading, and people coming far and wide to attend. So we know this from what they found when they have excavated into these mounds. And they can find materials like copper that was brought in from the state of what we now call the state of Michigan, the mineral mica from Appalachia in the Carolinas, turtle shells from Florida, that dark stone obsidian from Wyoming and Idaho. So this indicates that trade was very active and widespread even during the Hopewell era. Let's take a look at some grave goods that they have found from that world. Here's an old 19th century rendering by a European artist capturing one such earthwork and mound. On the left, you may recognize that buck-toothed animal with its distinctive tail. Yes, that's a beaver. Definitely an animal we associate with the woodlands. This is a pipe made up of a stone known as pipestone, river pearls for its eyes, and a little bit of bone, of course, for its tooth. It's beautifully carved and a handheld object. The small hole you see here is how you would place it in your mouth. The back of the animal would be stuffed with tobacco and ignited. And perhaps as you held it up to your face, you would gaze into the otherworldly white eyes of that animal and connect to a spiritual force, again, through the natural world, as we've seen many global cultures as well. Another typical grave good found in the Hopewell mounds is what you see on the right. This is an effigy of a falcon. It's made from a pounded sheet of copper and then cut into this profile view shape of that bird of prey with its wings extended. Copper was a major ingredient for Hopewell mortuary goods. It comes from the earth, so it had spiritual significance as its powers come from the earth and the underworld, where these people believed would be the realm of the dead. Many cut-out sheets of copper have been found, formed into things like headdresses for the elite, and likely interred with their remains. Mica, that kind of sparkly material sometimes you see embedded in rocks you might pick up in your yard, was another material popular to use, and they were able to harvest big sheets of it, again, brought in from far away in the southeast United States. These are some examples of other grave goods formed in sheets of mica. Here we have a human hand. This looks like a bird claw. Here we have something evocative of a bear paw with its claws and pads. And then, of course, this fantastic long-fingered hand that you see on the right here. As you know, mica is almost like mirror-like in its finish. So, these, of course, would have been sparkly adornments, but perhaps their mirror-like surfaces were used for divination as well. So that is an introduction to the Hopewell Cultural Era and some examples of what survived the millennia. Thanks for joining me.